Institute of Food Technologists IFT, we will be hosting Brodie Vissers, the coffee consultant and filmmaker. Our event is sponsored by Kuru Kahveci Mehmet Efendi, so special thanks for their collaboration. Let's hear from him, shall we?
Thank you, Romaira, for the wonderful intro. It's great to be here. It's my first time in Ankara, so thank you for filling this room. All of you have some good coffee with you, hopefully. Cheers. Or what I'm trying to popularize is şerefe for coffee. It's going to take a while, I think. But yeah, thanks for the intro. I'm Brodie Vissers. The Nomad Barista is kind of a project that I've been taking with me since I started my coffee journey. And I want to thank, of course, Kuru Kahveci Mehmet Efendi for bringing me along for their coffee journey. You know, they've been around since 1871. We're going to talk a little bit about how they came to be and some of the profound impact that they had on specifically Turkish coffee, but then also how Turkish coffee impacted the world of coffee. And as was mentioned, I've traveled the world looking for coffee. I've traveled the world drinking coffee. As you can see, I'm looking off into the mountains trying to figure out where I'm going to get my next coffee in this photo. First, I wanted to ask you a question. How far would you go for coffee? Down the block? Across town? Would anyone travel across town, take a bus, or go on by bike, or take your car to go get a nice coffee? Okay, at least 1, 2, 3. So normally, somewhere close by, right? How far does coffee go to get to you? How far does it come? Well, I did a quick calculation. I actually just asked ChatGPT, how far is the furthest coffee-producing country from Ankara? And it is 12,251 kilometers away. It's somewhere in Papua New Guinea, so that's a coffee-growing region. So really, that's what this presentation is about exploring coffee trends and traditions. I'm going to talk a little bit about Turkish coffee, but I think a lot of you are quite familiar with it. Maybe you'll learn a few things as I'm learning along the way. What I love about coffee is so much more than just the caffeine or the taste of it, but it's really about the trends and traditions that come with it. It's really a drink that brings people together, and it's different depending on where you are in the world. So a little bit about me. As I mentioned, the Nomad Barista was a concept that I came up with in 2016. And it was something that I wanted to bring with me on all my travels. So I thought, I love to travel, I wanted to travel more, but I wanted to create a focus to my travels. And maybe this story can also inspire some of you. I know that you're working with food, with engineering, with food science, and gastronomy, and how, foods, how something that we eat every single day, how it affects, how it affects different cultures and how it's inspired by different cultures. So that was what I tried to do with coffee. And so I decided I'm going to create a focus to my travels. I don't want to just go pop up in different places and always go to the same touristy places that everyone else was going. I wanted to go and find a local coffee shop and create a connection with someone, tell their story, write it down in my blog. So because of that, I started coffee consulting for a few different cafes. And then, of course, that led to starting my YouTube channel, which I'll show you a little snippet of in a second. And of course, the Instagram is just a great way to continue telling those stories in a visual fashion. In 2019, I opened a cafe with a friend in Toronto, which I have now since left, but it was a really great experience to learn how to open a cafe, as I had been consulting other people. And then, hosting coffee experiences along the way as well, in person. So I love doing things online and creating a lot of content, but I also love being in person and sharing my journeys, hence journey coffee experiences, and then helping people to come along the journey with me, while also discovering the journey that coffee goes on to get into each one of our cups here, because it's as I just showed you, it's a long voyage. Has anyone seen pictures of this before? The coffee fruit. It's actually not a cherry. It's not even a berry. It's a drupe, but it's a type of fruit that grows on trees lusciously like this. Sometimes mostly red, sometimes yellow. But of course, Ethiopia, that's kind of what set off the culture of drinking coffee in Ethiopia. So a long time ago. We don't know the exact history. I wanted to link it back, of course, to Turkey and where this popular culture of drinking coffee really started to take off. Because I mentioned Ethiopia. It was consumed there, but it wasn't really a structured cultural gathering at that point. It did head to Yemen, as was mentioned earlier. So Yemen was one of the first places where they started to cultivate coffee, but also, started that culture of bringing people together. But jumping forward to the 17th century, this is a typical coffee house, and Nicholas Roland put it very, very nicely when he said, the coffee, which the Turkish pound and boil in water, and they take it for pleasure instead of brandy. So instead of alcohol, they'd be sipping it through the lips, boiling hot. So this is interesting to see sort of the first Europeans experiencing what people during the Ottoman Empire were already doing for a long time. I just wanted to run you through the process that coffee goes through from the farm level until it's ready to be shipped and then roasted. So for example, Kuru Kahveci is gathering coffee from all over the world, but it's coming in its green bean form. And so what I want to show you is a little bit of the process of how it gets to that form from these beautiful cherries. This is a photo from India where they're picking some coffee cherries off the tree. This is the selection process, so all the cherries are going to go through. They're going to make sure they find the good ones. They separate them from maybe some of the defective ones. And then part of the washing is to actually take off the skins. So they're taking all those skins off, they're washing it off, putting it in a big pile. Then they'll dry them on these big beds, sometimes for a few weeks at a time, right, to get all the moisture down to a level of between 11 and 13%. So that's kind of the ideal humidity for the seeds, the coffee beans. But they'll also dry like this. So this is called the natural process, where you just leave the cherry on the seed and just dry it in the sun, rotating it, making sure that it has a nice even drying process. But then there's also special fermentation. So this would be something that's going to produce a lot more of like a winey flavor, some more acidity. This is moving more into the coffee trend of the time. You'll find a lot more coffees in some specialty coffee shops that might be doing fermentations like this. But these are the main styles of processing. So washed, as I mentioned, is where you really wash the cherries and you get all the pulp off of there. Then the honey process, where you keep some of the pulp on there during the fermentation, and that will impart some very interesting sort of winey, fruity flavors. And then the natural, depending on the recipe, depending on how many weeks you leave it, depending on even the climatic conditions, it will impart different flavors as well, because it's a drying fruit around that seed. In 1871, I don't know how many of you know this, but on that street, the one that I'm just showing you right here, that's called Tammis Street. So Tammis, so in Arabic it means like kind of coffee, is it coffee roasting, or it's coffee roasting, roasting coffee. So they have their own word for it, which is really cool. If I tell you, or if I just say, hey, let's go for a coffee, or you're telling your friends after class, you say, let's just go for a coffee. Which one of these images comes to mind? Which one of them do you resonates most with you? Who would say number one? Okay, all right. Some latte art, some maybe black coffee, some milk. Who says number two? Okay, a few of you. And how about number three? A lot of sugar, caramel, Starbucks. Okay, we got a few in the back. Awesome. So that's good. That's interesting to know. I'm also number one, right? This is the culture that I grew up in as well in North America. This is sort of what we would call also specialty coffee. You see some of the latte art and some espresso just being drunk straight on its own. So I have another question. When I say Türk kahvesi, which of these do you think of right away? If I just said like Turkish coffee, do you think, who thinks my grandparents? Okay, a few of you, maybe not drinking as much Turkish coffee. What about number two? Who is it like a daily drink? You're always drinking it. Okay, interesting. Maybe an ancient tradition. Some of these kind of overlap. Maybe my grandparents, they feel ancient. Number four, only for a special occasion. Maybe it's something like much more ceremonial or traditional. Does anyone want to share what kind of special occasion would you have Turkish coffee in? What do you have one? Yeah, tell this story.
Also, it's a tradition, not only serve Turkish coffee, but also put a little bit salt in it. So if the groom drinks the whole coffee, it means that he can do everything for you. So it's a bit stressful, but yeah, it's also a tradition about Turkish coffee, in the engagement. I just want to share it.
Thank you. So these are some specialty coffee tools, right? These are fancy coffee tools that people are using in both cafes and now even more so at home. This is a home setup, which is, does this look excessive to you? You think this is too much? Too expensive. I don't know who had the idea that I want all white of one thing and I want the same thing in black, but I think it was just for the photo. But over here we've got, does anyone know what this is? WDT, yeah. Does anyone know what we do with it? So we've got some coffee nerds in the audience. I love this. Okay, so basically, yeah, when you're doing espresso, you want to just mix up some of the clumps with this very trendy new tool that just kind of became popular. And of course, we've got a scale and we've got a big coffee grinder. These right here, as contrast, are very traditional coffee brewing devices, right? So these have been around for a very long time. So we just showed you something that they're changing all the time. You know, people are buying an excessive amount of these tools. Maybe they don't use them all. Maybe they do. But before, you know, in Vietnam, has anyone had a café fin? This one over here? So in Vietnam, they have these little drippers, so that metal piece is filled with coffee. It's actually similar to Turkish coffee in some ways. It's a very slow process, except that it actually filters through the metal as opposed to sitting in the cup. And then they'll often serve it over top of condensed milk. So the more you mix it, the sweeter it is, right? But if you don't mix it, you just drink it from the top. Has anyone had an Ethiopian coffee ceremony? We talked about Ethiopia earlier. This is the original way of drinking coffee, or maybe this came a little bit later, but these are what we would call a jebena, right? And then coffee is being brewed in there for a very long time. In fact, in the Ethiopian coffee ceremony, what they'll actually do is they'll roast it in front of you. But my question here is, given your studies in food science and engineering and food engineering, have you ever seen modern practices and equipment used to enhance food traditions? Right? Like I have a little image of a rolling pin, right? But maybe they have a even more sophisticated version of that, or maybe the bakers have realized, no, this is the best thing ever, and it's never going to get better. You can only use the traditional way. Does anyone have any examples of these kind of equipment and practices that have been somehow enhanced, or they've been brought along the way in terms of food? This is going to be on the exam, so. No, nothing. I got a chance to visit a cezve manufacturer when I was in Istanbul last week, and we got to see the way that he made all these, not only cezves, but also pans and big pots, all out of copper. So instead of, using some advanced, metal or titanium or Teflon or whatever you might use for cooking, copper was the traditional way. And they maintain that tradition of doing copper and then even lining a lot of the pans with silver. So they're quite expensive, they're very solid, but they've got a lifetime guarantee because they know this is the traditional way that has worked for generations, and we're going to continue doing it. At the end of the day, it has to evolve. Whether it's fortunately or unfortunately, we are evolving. There's more of us. Maybe it's not always for speed. Maybe the evolution is more so, let's take a look back. Let's reflect back on some of the traditions. Let's try to maintain them.
We should be the ones to improve technology so food stays stays original and keeps its essence, because at the end of the day we are trying to manage that. Also, technology does not have to be some kind of evil thing like a Terminator, because it keeps us forward and maybe helps us keep the originality of the food. So we should be the ones preserving it while using technology.
Yeah, I agree. We should at least be helping us coffee baristas to be able to work together, right? Because it is about food, and food and coffee always go together. Anyone else have some insights? What's the next wave of food?
So people are more knowledgeable about what they eat, actually. So I can say that the products that have a function that on your body is the next wave of the food, but also the animal product is kind of eliminating slowly. I can say that.
being more conscious about what we're actually eating, which is interesting because I think in the past, maybe centuries ago, we didn't think about it as much, but we were eating a lot of whole foods, right? So there was nutritious. And we're eating a lot of local foods, which is also nutritious. But then it became very processed. Even in the last century, a lot of processed foods, a lot of sugars, a lot of, different synthetic, maybe sometimes. So I agree with that. It's like coming back to being conscious about what we're putting in our bodies. You know, what's the next wave of coffee? I think that this is also a big part of it. You know, for me, it's a lot of coming back to traditions in order to excite people about new ways of drinking coffee. Because, you know, for us in North America, maybe we didn't really drink espresso-based coffee until 20, 30 years ago, and that was very exciting for a lot of people. And, you know, it's about these fusions, these crossing over of cultures. The next wave of coffee could be starting to embrace new origins of coffee. Any thoughts for how you see coffee evolving and transitioning into the next phase?
We like to complicated things like big machines, different kind of techniques, but recently we want more slow methods, slow ways of doing that with the minimal techniques.
As you can see, we still like technical, complicated things, but I do agree. I think we're seeing, at least for myself and some others, that we're starting to migrate back to the traditions and the sort of the minimalistic way, but minimal because it stands the test of time. Right? It's gone through many, many, many years in terms of decades and centuries. And some of these things up here, I think they will come quickly, and some of them will stay, but some of them will just go, right? And people like to experiment, and that's fine. Having a coffee setup like this, go for it if you can. But also remembering where we came from and being able to, you know, maybe just focus on one thing and doing it very well and taking it as a ritual, which links back to what we were saying about conscious eating, conscious food, knowing where it comes from, knowing what the impact that it has on our body. So now, you know, for example, we can go anywhere in the world and get a Starbucks or get a McDonald's. We have Apple stores around the whole world. What I would love to see is a little bit more of each individual culture being able to represent and embrace where they came from with coffee and with food. Thanks for coming. And don't forget, xerefe.